Hey everyone, Bryan Barletta here from Sounds Profitable, and I'm very excited to walk you through this latest product deep dive with Jon Stephenson from SoundStack. Jon, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Brian. How are you doing? Thanks
I'm
for having me on your show.
so good, Jon, so good. I'm excited to dig through this because we've had a chance to talk and work together for a long time, but I think it's really important to lay the groundwork first of what is SoundStack, because SoundStack is a rebrand or a combination of several different companies coming together. So I'm going to pass that over to you to walk us through that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So SoundStack was originally created as a company that I founded called Empire Streaming back in 2010. So basically 12 years ago. Our premise back then as a company was really to focus on helping live audio publishers, so OTA over-the-air radio stations and internet-only radio stations to distribute their content. And the whole premise of the company back then, and still is true to today through SoundStack, is to help publishers to get access to different tools, not only to distribute their content, but first and foremost, also monetize it so they can make a sustainable digital audio ecosystem for their platform. So today we are an audio as a service company, and we help publishers, anyone from an enterprise level publisher, like a podcast network or over-the-air radio groups, and also other hosting platforms to distribute and monetize their content on the internet. And one of the unique things about us is that we're fully bootstrapped. So we have just over 70 full-time employees, and we're 100% independent. So our stakeholders are ultimately our partners and our customers. And our mission ultimately as a company is to simplify audio for both the creator aspect and also for advertisers to fuel the digital audio ecosystem.
I think that's really exciting because I think we're in a point in podcasting where we started very technical and hands-on, especially in the audio space. Everything was technical. And I think that's where you saw a lot of your success to start. And I think it kind of rubber banded back to a lot of like, just kind of upload your file and we'll take care of it for you. And that's why we saw the push for so many hosting platforms. But with consolidation and whatnot, there are many partners out there at all levels that are evaluating whether or not a completely different company's process and roadmap and goals really align with what they need from their technology partner or what they want to offer to their clients as well. So we're in this really cool growth phase of podcasting, of audio, where tools like yours will allow people to kind of offer their own service from a handful of products that you offer and really kind of drive their own thing, pick and choose what they want to build themselves versus what they want to add in there. And they can start off as simple as just loading everything up directly with you and then moving on to, self-managed too, it sounds like.
Yep. No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, our customers and partners are our stakeholders. So one of the unique things with us is, yeah, if there's a suggestion that you have, if there's a particular need, I mean, we are definitely all ears and we're here to make your success our success as well. So
awesome. So really excited today because there's three facets of SoundStack that we're going to dig into. One is like the podcast and distribution side. The other part of it is broadcast to podcast, which has really been very popular over the last few years in acquisitions and podcasting. And finally, the monetization solution. Jon, I'm really excited for us to dig in and start off with the podcaster side.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's go ahead and dig in. And you should be seeing the UI now. So this is our podcaster content management system. The reason why we built Podcaster was first and foremost a focus on DAI, dynamic ad insertion, and also things like white labeling. So we have many different partners that either utilize the CMS, which is the UI that you see here, in very much a white label fashion. And I'm just going to hop over to staging environment.
Look at that.
See the beautiful Sounds Profitable logo. You can have a hosting platform up and running this afternoon if you want. So white labeling is definitely one aspect of the podcaster content management system. And then also just the underlying dynamic ad insertion and programmatic enablement with what we work with many different partners, including Blueberry on, to focus on giving their creators ultimately access to monetization tools that many of the larger companies ultimately have. So digging into the UI, as you can see here, we are within a demo organization that I set up for today. And you can see you can manage multiple different shows. So I have 3 different fictitious shows, which maybe they'll eventually become a real show at some point in the future. But yeah, you can ultimately manage all of your different shows through our podcaster content management system. We have different things like grouping, You can associate it to a different publisher in the system. So this is really beneficial for particularly over-the-air radio groups. So like a group, for example, if you're a larger OTA that operates across a bunch of different designated market areas, so like different regions, you can actually segment your podcasts relative to those. Or if they ultimately belong to a radio station, which also ties into like our broadcast to podcast tool, which we'll be going through as well. You can do that as part of like your repurposed content. So if you imagine you have hundreds of different shows here as part of your workflow, it's easy to show the different association and kind of streamline all of that.
Well, it's smart because two different levels of filtering is really attractive, whether you use them specifically how you said or use them for your own custom purposes. This is a tool that it sounds like if I'm a big enough company, this is the right way for me to go in here and really have control over what my clients see and what my customers see and how everything works together. So having those features are really great. This UI here, you showed me the default SoundStack one, the branded one with Sounds Profitable, which I'm incredibly flattered on. I assume that in this situation, I can also build my own UI and make calls directly to all of this.
Yeah, so we have many different platforms that work with us in kind of a couple of different ways. So we also work with many partners to do the content delivery aspect with DAI on top of it. So if you already have your own existing hosting platform, we would basically sit in front of your end listener. So you would keep your entire hosting platform, your analytics, all of your different user management, your players. We kind of just sit as a layer in between all of that. Very similar to how most hosting platforms are working with like Amazon CloudFront or Cloudflare or all of the different like content delivery networks out there. But our purpose for being a CDN is very much first and foremost focused on that DAI and then coupling it with things like programmatic or if you want to use our own ad decisioning or plug in a different third-party ad server, you can do all of that and work with our team to configure that.
I like that. Well, let's break down the CDN thing for a bit for everybody to understand. So dynamic ad insertion is when a download request comes in. And in that moment, it says, what are the available ad breaks and how many ads are in each of those breaks for this episode? What campaigns do I have available? And is it the right fit? And so then it tries to put them all together. It says, well, I have these 4 audio files. I have these 4 places to put the audio files. Stitching together is the process of, for that unique download, combining them. Now, that unique download might not be completely unique. There might be 100 people who get that exact same download, during that specific day, or even over a week because the combinations just work out the same. But the process of taking those 4 audio files from the ads and combining it with that episode into one unique file is stitching. And stitching is probably one of the hardest parts about dynamic ad insertion. I think we see a lot of people out there that do like the host-enabled ad insertion, which is a finite number of combinations. And the focus there really is they build those combinations immediately, store all of those in their CDN, and you're good to go. But with dynamic ad insertion, you need to be willing to make that custom creation in that moment. That request is completely unique in that moment. And that's the value here, is that SoundStack can provide it A to Z, hosting, ad serving, and the CDN aspect with stitching. But they also, if you're a hosting platform and you're not able to do the stitching yourself or you don't want to dig into it, it is intensive, then you can just use the stitching and the CDN aspect from SoundStack, still take advantage of all of the other benefits of your platform and not lose any of your identity there. I think that's a really key thing to think about as partners realize how easy it could be for them to have their own hosting platform or just to be a little bit more in control of everything they set up. With the core still being SoundStack, the attractive thing here is that this infrastructure can be IAB certified and it can be set up for things like Spotify pass-through. 2 really important things in the industry that can be gatekeepers financially, can stop you from being able to get your maximum monetization potential. So by rallying around a piece of software that multiple people can use, it allows SoundStack to build that up more and more for its existing clients and make sure those things are set.
Yep. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Brian. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, especially as even podcasts become more transacted programmatically, there's infinite number of different versions of that podcast. And there's a lot that ultimately goes into it too, including like, volume matching, all of that kind of stuff. So there's many different permutations of, the exact same podcast episode that could be delivered uniquely to every single user. And one of the big value propositions here is we handle all of that stitching and delivery. But if you want to plug into our programmatic marketplace, you can do that with a click of a button. Or if you want to use another third party, you can have like an ad server or another SSP sit on top of it. And we have our own proprietary ad decisioning engine that basically does all of that in real time to enable that for publishers and ultimately the partners that we work with.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so digging into the UI, the groups and publishers, so it's definitely very useful for content management. But if you also think about things like viewing your analytics and also things around just trafficking dynamic ads as well, that's where it becomes very important too, especially if you have dozens of radio stations and again, like even hundreds of different shows. It becomes useful as a tool basically, so you're not having to manually associate things on the back end or download CSVs and try to, do VLOOKUPs and pivot tables and all those kinds of fun things. So there's a lot. I know it's just two little drop downs right now, but there's a lot that these associations power for particularly enterprise publishers that have scale in terms of content.
And can I set permissions based on groups and publishers?
Yes, so you can do that. So we basically have role-based access control, and there's different levels. So there's like an admin that belongs to the organization. So you basically have superpower to edit and view everything. If you want to traffic campaigns against a specific group in our SoundStack Monetize product, you can do all of that. If you want to give people access or particular user access to only specific shows or to view analytics of specific shows, you can do all of that. So there's definitely some pretty granular levels of control that you can do, which is ultimately really beneficial as you have, dozens or hundreds of different people that are accessing your content.
I agree. I think that's probably the most consistent part of an enterprise platform is user control.
Yep. No, definitely. Security is a big thing. Cool. Just to kind of go through a couple of the features from a high level. So we have a couple of different versions of shows. And the main reason for this is we want to enable it for anybody to manage all of their on-demand content from the same user interface. So we have the concept of programs, which is like a traditional podcast where you upload your audio content from. So you can either manually upload it to us or do like a broadcast to podcast as part of your workflow, and it's automatically going to upload the episode to it. We do have the concept of playlists, which is kind of unique to us. So playlists are basically an association and a collection of all of your different episodes in a program, and they're based on different like tagging rules. So a good example of this, if you have 10 different shows and you wanted to create a best of tag and add it to different episodes, so you can kind of curate a particular player or a dedicated RSS feed that you want to be able to give to your users. You can do that in a very seamless way and also dynamically, so you're not having to go and manually add episodes each time to a dedicated playlist. And this is really important definitely for things like discovery and whatnot, which is really awesome. And then also the concept of subscriptions. So we don't actually handle user management for like your end users if you're selling a subscription or do anything with payments. But again, being able to manage all of your on-demand content from one single interface. This is a plug and play way to basically get an authenticated RSS feed that then you can use with something like Supporting Cast and have it interface directly with Podcaster.
Smart. And each of those are basically outputs of RSS feeds, right? So program being like ideally like all of Sounds Profitable, but considering Sounds Profitable as like our narrated articles now, the download, it has, I have AdTech applied, and Tom Webster is going to be having his own segment too, his own show on there as well. I could then create a playlist that splits each one of those in there for different aspects of my site. And if I wanted to do a subscription feed that doesn't have the ads but does have the content, I can create now 3 different layers that all have the right output, and now it can be automated. Now, because of tagging and because of how I set it up, I know one doesn't have ads. I know one automatically is where I put all my content, and by tagging it correctly, it gets into the right playlist. Is that accurate?
That's definitely one implementation of it. Yeah, I mean, there's many different ways you could do it. So the use case that you gave is a perfect example of what you can do with the 3 different versions of shows.
I like that flexibility. I think we tend to think about a show as too self-contained, and you put it in that show and it just lives in that show. But there's a lot of really cool things out there. There are companies out there that create those aggregate playlist feeds that pull in one season of their audio drama, and then in the next season it's a different audio drama, and they add some additional episodes to it. really creative ways to reuse content. And we talk about reusing content a lot in podcasting, from audio into video, audio into text, but this is a fantastic tool that will let you do audio into more audio.
Yep, absolutely. Cool. So I'm going to drill down into an episode level. So this is, again, a fictitious show called Stacker in the Morning. Just a couple of quick things to highlight. So we do have the concept to obviously edit different things on your RSS feed and be able to do things, again, back to the group and publisher association. You can do the tagging here. So this is basically going to add those tags automatically to any episode. If you upload a new episode to this program, for example. And we also support things like Podcasting 2.0, which has been over the past, I would say, 4 to 6 months, a request from a couple of different customers. We added a couple of quick wins there to be able to support that.
Let's highlight that for a second. I think that Podcasting 2.0 is very interesting, and there's a lot of really cool ideas coming out there. And I think that a lot of the pushback comes from the fact that we need adoption for a handful of them from the major podcast players, but there's a substantial amount of them that just benefit podcasters, regardless of what app picks up the RSS feed. So hearing that you guys in this stage of where you are, I mean, you rebranded this year and you've innovated quite a bit this year to already have 2 Podcasting 2.0 features there. I'd like to highlight that as a great sign that you do listen to client feedback and you're willing to innovate quickly.
Yeah, no, definitely. And even expanding upon that, I mean, one of the ideas is to help promote and even make some additional new standards for the Podcasting 2.0 initiative, especially with, seeing hopefully more clients like players and whatnot to be able to adopt those standards. So things like actually being able to stream a podcast, not a progressive download, but an actual stream. There's a lot of different powerful stuff there. So being able to take some of these new standards and then also help to hopefully embrace them and offer feedback to those standards. I mean, that's definitely something that is a huge part of our focus and is going to help ultimately power more of the industry.
Heck yeah.
Cool. So we also have a embed player, which is the concept to basically have all of your different episodes show. So this is also something like if you on your website had a playlist, you could generate a player on the fly for this and basically embed it on your website with an iframe. You can do things like customizing the theme. So you have the concept of, 2 themes that are basically built out of the box, a light and dark one, or if you wanted to change different colors, you can change like the background color and all of that, and basically take this and embed it on your website. So that's definitely really beneficial for things like curation and whatnot. To expand on this, I mean, one of the things that we're heavily working on in the back end is to get more granular analytics around this, because ultimately you have that direct connection with the end user, the listener, and being able to offer better things like, a listen through rate, like how long has somebody listened to my 33-minute and 35-second podcast? Where did they drop off? What did an ad cause fatigue of, people ending my show at 15 minutes into it? So there's a lot of cool stuff. And as more adoption happens through these players, we're going to be able to get better analytics, better insights into who our audience is, but then ultimately what are they doing and what's kind of their behaviors behind it. So basic right now, but there's a lot on our roadmap in 2023 to focus on bringing more power to the publishers.
I think there's a lot of value in having data, even if it's not a substantial amount, about the podcast player on your website that can really tailor what does and doesn't work for you and give you insight into what additional content to build or how to highlight it.
Yep, no, absolutely. It's better to start collecting it now and then figure out how you're going to use some of it later, as long as it's legally connected or collected. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot you can do there for sure. I'm actually going to skip over analytics because that's actually going to be a future product deep dive sometime next year, because we do have a substantial release for it. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over that. But yeah, in terms of settings on the show, again, it's purpose built for audio monetization. So there's a lot of things you could do just to automatically enable pre-rolls, things like your post-roll, add multiple ads, which sounds a little bit funny saying it out loud, but yeah, so this is also the concept if you have like mid-rolls, and particularly for longer form content, if you want to insert multiple ads into a single ad break, you can do that. So you're not limited by just a single dynamic ad for a mid-roll position, or you have to add multiple mid-roll positions basically back to back. You can support the concept of being able to insert up to 3 ads currently. We did have a request to do it up to 4, so that's probably something that'll be on a roadmap here very shortly. But yeah, you can basically have multiple ads within the same single ad break. And again, for things like over-the-air radio shows, like morning show or whatever, a lot of those ad breaks are typically like at 8 minutes. So listeners are typically pretty used to listening to them with longer ad breaks. We also have the concept of Splice. So Splice is our broadcast the podcast tool. This is basically the entry point for that content to come into our podcaster content management system. So you're going to do things like different naming templates. So if you have a morning show, you could use a macro that basically is the name of the podcast, or you could even input specific text there and then give it a date, and it's going to make a unique podcast episode name each time, which is really beneficial. So you're not having to manually go up or manually update them each time, which is really beneficial as well to publishers. Again, focusing on making things very simple and very automated behind the scenes for publishers. Playlist content sharing. So if you wanted to have this program actually exist as part of a playlist, this just gives you a little bit more control over that. So if you had a program that you wanted to be standalone, you can make it so, ultimately it's not inheriting into a playlist based on different tags and all of that. RSS prefixes we ultimately support out of the gate, and then ultimately redirects. If you're moving it to another third party, you can redirect it off the platform as well.
These are some really great settings to templatize the show, right? To really define what it is. I love the way that in settings here, you're determining the structure for the show, how many ad breaks can be allowed, or how many different, like the types pre-roll, mid-roll, post-roll, can multiple be there in a break. I think we tend to look at those a lot individually per episode on a lot of platforms. I think that setting some parameters for like a ceiling for the most you can do is attractive to me, because we do need to get a read of that. We do need consistency between episodes, maybe not necessarily between shows. Shows obviously have different patterns, but I think having that ceiling is really powerful there. And I do like, as we get into Splice, which will be the next section we talk about, I like the ability to say that this show can have spliced episodes in it, or this show can be part of playlists. Really determining the rules for this show in one location instead of being able to pull anything in or kick anything into it from the other destination.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, our whole product strategy is around giving control to publishers and then ultimately making it very simple. So that's our goal, and that's what we try to do.
Great.
We did touch a little bit on users. So, I mean, again, we have a whole role-based access control system, and this works across all of our different apps. So right now we're viewing the UI for our podcaster content management system, but we have a couple of different other user interfaces, like a dedicated insights dashboard for users to view analytics, things like our console, which sits on top of our SoundStack engine product, our monetized product. So all of the user accounts actually work across all of the different platforms using single sign-on. And again, you can get very granular in terms of how you want to give different privileges to different people within your organization, and do it in a view/read-only mode, or if you want to give specific, write privileges to somebody to be able to edit the show or edit a particular group of shows, you can definitely do all of that. And this is one place that you can manage users relative to a specific show, or we have account management that sits in another aspect of our products as well. So it's really made to give you that control and granularity that an enterprise product should.
Permissions are important.
Absolutely. Cool. And then lastly, at the show level, one of the things we did touch on a little bit before is the destinations. So a big one, like you mentioned, is Spotify, and why that's really important for things like dynamic ad insertion and ultimately analytics is traditionally, if your host isn't enabled for what's called Spotify pass-through, Spotify is effectively caching those podcast episodes. So they're still able to be discovered by a listener on the Spotify platform, but the actual podcast downloads not coming from that CDN layer, whether it's us or whether it's, a CloudFront or even just somebody's own dedicated hosting platform. And why that's important is ultimately for things like DAI, right? So if you're not able to interact directly with the listener, you're ultimately not able to insert ads. So I think a big thing, and we've seen some decent traction from podcast hosts just over the past couple of years of getting enabled for Spotify pass-through, is very much focused on that DAI aspect. So you can actually monetize your whole audience, not everybody but Spotify. And then also things like analytics. So if you're thinking about, computing IAB certified analytics or however you want to compute the analytics there, the listener request that when a person listens to a podcast on Spotify ultimately has to make it to the server that is actually delivering the episode and not one of Spotify's servers. So this is definitely something that is very heavily used by our publishers. And again, is very much for things like DAI on top of it.
And pass-through isn't as easy to get anymore. I mean, in the few years that we've been running Sounds Profitable, it was a little bit easier. You just needed to show intent and apply for it. And now it's really important. They want to see that, your platform has active users, has enough volume and interest in dynamic ad insertion, which means kind of taking the risk, right? Serving ads that are everywhere but Spotify while waiting for approval there. So I really think this is a glowing endorsement as a white label product here that you already have this, because it really means that somebody who really wants to get up and running this afternoon with their own hosting platform and ad server doesn't have to sacrifice anything and wait for approval. And that's really important there, because it's not only just the analytics, don't end up in your hosting platform. It's that Spotify's analytics in their platform are not the IAB standards. So now you're comparing two complete different set of analytics if you don't have pass through, regardless of even if you're serving ads, can be a big headache.
Yep, no, absolutely. And the last thing that I want to go through in the UI is at the episode level. So I'm just going to show you this really quick as well. So we have the concept of an audio editor, which allows you to do things like marking different ad placements and whatnot within your podcast episode. So here in this podcast, you can do things like control the pre-roll and post-roll at the episode level, and then also do things for marking your mid-roll insertion or replacement. One of the unique things with what this audio editor has is you can do an insertion, which is an example of this red marker right here. Basically, the way an insertion will work is if we have that marked, we can insert an ad, and it's going to basically dynamically extend the length of the show. But we also have the concept of replacement, and this is really important for things like over-the-air radio. If you want to take out your simulcasted commercials and do a replacement with those for DAI, or if you have a host read ad that you eventually want to remove and replace it with DAI, you can do all of that here, which is this example of a blue waveform, which has the ad ultimately marked to remove it from the episode as well.
Now, if you mark that and you don't serve an ad to where that new break is, will it just play the original, or does it just compress it and take out the blue area?
It will remove the actual content. Yeah, so it'll
awesome.
Compress it. It'll just shrink the size of the podcast.
I think that's really great. I mean, like you said, for the ad versions, taking a broadcast show into a podcast, there's going to be ads already in that audio that you're going to want to overwrite or just outright remove, and being able to do it here instead of kicking it to an audio editor and all of that really saves some time. You can also use this method for cool content creation, which I'm really excited about, because there's so many times where like an intro would change, right, to your show, and being able to block that off and use an ad to override that intro, to me, is really attractive. To be able to have that intro change depend on the quadrant of the United States they're in. If you're going on tour, I love this replacement technology, and I love that it basically is a handshake between where we were with baked in, where we're moving with embedded, and then the true power of dynamic ad insertion, and further from that, programmatic. So very cool for you guys to have all of this in here.
Yeah, and again, the supply opportunities that these ultimately create can be plugged into ultimately our ad decisioning engine, our marketplace, our ad server, or if you have a third-party relationship with companies like Triton Digital or AdsWiz, or even if you want to use like Google Ad Manager for doing your trafficking of your audio ads, you can plug all of that in. And this is just the content aspect that is enabling and opening up those supply opportunities for your content.
Great.
And that about wraps up the podcaster content management system.
So, Jon, now the next part we're going to look at is the broadcast to podcast side. And I like this a lot. I mean, my entire background has been in the digital side. I started in like mobile rich media and moved into audio through podcasting. And I think a lot of people in podcasting today are either brand new to media overall or did come from a digital side. But broadcast is still incredibly powerful, and there's a lot of value there. The more time I spend outside of the US, the more I'm realizing is that the radio adoption, the listen of radio content is really high in a lot of European countries. And a big thing that they do is they do a lot of catch-up radio, which I think is something the US has kind of lagged behind. So a broadcast to podcast tool is a setup to be able to ingest that live feed, properly cut it up the way you need to, and then turn it into on-demand audio. And this is what we're going to walk through today, right?
Yeah, exactly. Again, broadcast to podcast has been something that has been around, but I think it's becoming a lot more widely used, especially as podcasts has grown, and ultimately publishers really want to expand their audience and find different monetization strategies to monetize their on-demand audience versus their linear live streaming audience in different ways and all of that. So this is one of the tools that very much helps to facilitate that for any size publisher, whether you're an enterprise level one, or even if you're a small, to mid-size over-the-air radio station. Our goal with this was to make it very simple and very streamlined to capture that live audio content and make it as a podcast very seamlessly.
Great. And so this UI and the UI, you talked about it for the broadcaster side, and I think that's really neat. But there's an opportunity here for someone's focus, this to be a tool that someone uses to provide these services to broadcasters or for specific shows and personalities that have the rights to their individual show. This doesn't have to be set up for an entire broadcast unit. It can be just per show, right?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah. So the UI that you're seeing here is our SoundStack console. SoundStack console is the UI that sits on top of our SoundStack engine product. So there's basically two ways that people can work with SoundStack engine. One is through the console UI, and secondly through an API integration. But SoundStack engine is really focused on providing audio infrastructure for the internet. So focusing on things like the delivery of live audio streams and podcasts, and being able to give publishers and other platforms that granularity and control over their different audio resources on our content delivery network. Now,
can this part of the UI be white labeled just like the others?
It can. We don't have anybody white labeling this part yet, but yeah, it's something that we'll use our exact role-based access control system, and we can do spin up an instance of the console UI as well.
That's good to know. I mean, but the reality here is this is very much a behind-the-scenes tool. This is what gets that data in and then pushes it out to your podcaster and distribution tool, to the monetization tool, more than a place where most people live in actively.
Yep, no, absolutely. And I mean, a big reason why we ultimately built SoundStack Engine is to remove a lot of that manual configuration, particularly on live streaming and all of that. So it was very much built for ourselves. So somebody's not, editing configs and using, things like Terraform and all of that to manage our infrastructure. So we wanted to make it very simple, but then ultimately afford that functionality directly to publishers. So you can manage things like your audio ingests directly through an interface, very similar to how you can manage Amazon, AWS resources through an interface as well. You could do that for audio here, and really kind of pick and choose how your audio infrastructure is set up. And one of those pieces is ultimately Splice, which is our broadcast to podcast tool. So if I'm going into Splice here, this is an example of a Splice setup. So what this is doing right now is it is pulling from a live streaming source. So if you think about an ingest for live streaming, an ingest is basically an entry point that an encoder, which typically sits at a radio studio, is pushing content into a network. And most of our customers, particularly on the enterprise side, are pushing multiple encoders. It's multiple locations for things like redundancy. So that's why you see things like, the ability to choose a backup source if you wanted. And once that content comes into our network as a live stream, so there's basically audio and metadata that makes it into our network, we can set up things like capture rules on top of that. So the two types of capture rules that we support are time-based ones. So you could do start and stop if you would like. If you want to do metadata, which is our preferred because it's ultimately the most precise, you can do that, or you could do a metadata trigger and then have a fixed duration for how you want to have the recording start. But basically what happens with this is the encoder or the automation system or somebody in the studio would ultimately sit there and send a metadata update saying, hey, we're going to start the show here. This is fully configurable. So you could put, basically whatever you want in there to actually match. They would send a metadata update. We'd start recording the beginning of the podcast and then ultimately end it based on another metadata update at the end of it. And that basically does the segmentation of that live audio stream. And again, if there's redundancy configured, you can pick and choose just ultimately with the nature of the internet. There's different things like routing issues, or different ISPs have issues with uploading content to our network sometimes and all of that. So really you can focus on making sure that content doesn't go away and you're getting the most reliable and most clear version of that podcast as well.
And there's a lot of tools out there for consumers even or mid-level that allow you to record something and rebroadcast it, right? Like Restream and some other tools out there, and they allow you to set a destination. That's what you're talking about with the encoder and how you guys capture it, right? There's the tool that these broadcasters use, that these video producers use, that everybody uses when they're trying to send out that signal. One of the destinations can be SoundStack. And from that, SoundStack looks at the metadata, looks at the time frame that it was received, and is able to cut it up.
Yep, exactly. So once it's done through the capture rules, basically segmenting that file as an on-demand audio file, then the next step is ultimately shipping it to a destination. And this is ultimately done all automatically. So the 3 different destinations that we support today is AWS S3, which is just Amazon Web Services S3 bucket. A good use case of that is once the files actually make it into S3, you can do a lot of different things on it, like trigger other workflows, or even just save it as a backup for archival purposes and whatnot. We do support AdsWiz's Simplecast, and then ultimately Podcaster, which is our content management system. And over time, going back to the agnostic aspect of our company and really giving publishers the power of choice and being able to do what they want to do. If somebody doesn't want to use our delivery for their podcasts, ultimately they can choose who they want to work with. So over time, our goal, especially into 2023, is growing this list of destinations and partners that are integrated with our broadcast to podcast tool.
And that's great because almost every hosting platform allows somebody to, through the API, drop off a file for a specific episode into their platform. And that means that you'll be able to integrate those really easily based on client requests. This tool excites me. I think everybody talks a lot about broadcast to podcast is like radio into podcasting, but what's neat about this and how you explained it with the encode aspect and how to push that content out there is there are so many creators out there that are doing live content. And there are so many tools that protect those creators from just putting that content in one location. And what you're talking about here is that you're another destination for that, right? There are the ability for people to send out their Twitch streams on video and be able to broadcast it to Twitch and to YouTube and all these other destinations. And I'm sure in the right setup, these people could also send either just the audio or the audio and video to you guys for you to be able to break that up and make it into a podcast. We're in the next stage of what audio creation is and how to reuse and recouple content, and tools that automate that process, I think, are still in high demand. I think we're still not seeing that. So appeasing this for streaming radio, which is something that is a home run, is fantastic. But seeing where this goes as the world continues to go into live streaming, continues to go into broadcast, and being able to allow people to repurpose it, I think is going to help a lot of creators make sure they don't lose anything.
Yep, exactly. And it's all about, expanding your audience, making sure that your content is most relevant to the audience relative to, even when they want to listen. So if they're not able to watch you or listen to you exactly at the time that you're broadcasting, this is a really powerful tool to make it automatic so you can capture all of that content and get it out to your users in as many places as possible. Awesome. So that's an example of our Splice tool.
I think all of you know by now that I'm a real big fan of sneak peeks. I love looking at things as they're being built and seeing how people are responding back to the market. And, the SoundStack platform, we've had a chance to look through so many aspects of it. And I'm such a big fan of what they're providing for hosting, what they're providing for broadcast to podcast. There's all the core benchmarks there, all the core features and needs that they're hitting, and they're going about it in a really neat style to make it your own. Now, the ad serving we can go through, and it is really robust. But what's really exciting is this alpha product that we're going to talk through. And I'm going to pass it over to Jon to explain a little bit about their monetized product and specifically the connector setting they have here, because programmatic has become such a massive buzzword in podcasting. And I don't think that there are as many tools available for programmatic and for people to maximize their revenue as there need to be. So, Jon, tell us a little bit about the connectors tool.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So SoundStack Connectors is an alpha product today, and we are working on very much rolling this out to customers in 2023. But we're really excited, and that's why I wanted to show you, because we've definitely talked about things like this in the past. SoundStack Connectors is basically a way to connect supply-based inventory if it's going through our content delivery network for things like dynamic ad insertion and whatnot, to connect it to a third-party source to ultimately get ads. One of the dilemmas that we've seen, and also many of our publisher partners, is, yeah, you can work with all these great ad tech partners and whatnot, but there's not really a way for all of them to work well together. And that's ultimately where SoundStack connectors come into play. So once we do the dynamic ad insertion on top of it, we have our ad decisioning layer, which connector sits based on top of that. So with this, let's go ahead and take a look at the UI. You can create different connectors to connect to different third-party ad servers and different SSPs. And we do have this functionality today. It is just done through like a support ticket. So this is something that we would configure on behalf of the publisher. But a lot of what we want to do as a company, and the whole premise of the software that we're building, is to make things very easy, but ultimately to give that power directly to the publisher. And that's where SoundStack Connectors affords that functionality for anybody to basically go in and connect their supply-based inventory to a third party.
Well, let's break that down for a second. So, my inventory on your platform is the supply. It's the ad inventory. I'm the seller of my inventory. And an SSP, a supply-side platform, the advantage of that is that the SSP then allows that inventory to be broadcast out to DSPs, demand-side platforms, where the buyers use that. SSPs are motivated to compete with each other. And the reason they are is because they can create unique deals for unique segments of content representing you to other DSPs for always on deals or preferential rates or whatnot. At the end of the day, I mean, if I have an SSP that I'm working with and I want to do a direct deal with someone on a DSP, they all can kind of accomplish the same goals. But there are tons of reasons why somebody would want multiple SSPs. They have different specialties. They appeal to different markets. They have different ad deals set up. Today in podcasting, it's really linear. I don't believe that the average podcaster, even on enterprise level, is exploring multiple SSPs. So what is particularly exciting about this for me is that this is a focus on your direct inventory, your supply, connecting not just to one SSP and them representing you to multiple solutions, but connecting to multiple SSPs that can then connect you to multiple solutions. And then when all of the responses come back, they can all compete, or you can stack them in different layers. This is how publishers make more money in programmatic. This is how they determine the value of their inventory, by making sure as many people as possible see it and the right people are representing them in the right environment.
Yep, no, you're exactly correct. And I mean, one of the big dilemmas with why a publisher doesn't want their inventory exclusively in a single SSP is, just who you can ultimately connect to on the DSP side, things like timeouts and whatnot. I mean, latency between SSPs and DSPs and whatnot is a big thing, especially to take into consideration with programmatic. So if you have that supply opportunity and you're able to route it closer and quicker to who ultimately the buyers are, and also build your business as you wish, that's where SoundStack Connectors comes into play. So to take a quick look at an example of a connector, this is a publisher that is using Google Ad Manager, so GAM, as an ad server for trafficking their audio ads. So with Google Ad Manager, we just have a basic generic fast tag that's basically sending the supply-based request to GAM and makes it available to stitch into a podcast or to stitch into a live stream. And connectors can sit on top of both your live streams and podcasts as well. So it's really nice because you don't have to necessarily segment your inventory if you don't want to. You would control what supply inventory, so the different publishers that you want to have selected in this particular connector. And then lastly, the different positions that you ultimately want to route and send to GAM. So if you do this, you could connect it to GAM. You can connect it to like an AdsWiz ad server, Triton's Tap. If you have another ad server, or even the direct campaigns that you can interface directly through SoundStack Monetize as well. So it's really nice because you ultimately control that supply. You can figure out who and how you want to route it.
I really like that. And, VAST is something that I think we're probably pushing to its limits in podcasting. It's not meant to necessarily be the way that platform to platform connection happens to serve ads, but we're making it work. And the specs are starting to be improved to show that and push us in different directions. But what's neat about this in an alpha is that today I can create that relationship with the supply side platform. If I have the VAST tag, you guys are equipped to receive that VAST tag. I can then work with any SSP and get this rolling here. But it's in SoundStack's DNA to go through all of this and create those relationships as well. In the same way that SSPs and DSPs create the relationships, I see a future where SoundStack starts integrating these SSPs, because those tags are very similar with different IDs that change per publisher. And then you're going to be able to create and offer partners that work with you the ability to explore more representation than some of your competitors. That's a really great opportunity to make sure everybody has a chance to be monetized.
Yep, no, absolutely. I mean, things like, macros and different ways of implementing and timeouts and windows of reporting ad impressions and all of that. That's all stuff that we're definitely taking into consideration and is part of our beta of SoundStack connectors, which is going to be coming next. So very excited for that.
Yeah.
And then next, on top of SoundStack connectors, just to show you this as well really quick, we do have the concept of yield management. So this is basically a lightweight SSP that can sit in front of your other SSPs and ad servers. So for this particular publisher, Stacker in the Morning, we have the pre-roll position. So you can really do different mediation strategies that you want relative to the zone position. So we have two different mediation strategies. One is just a traditional waterfall, or you can basically stack rank these and it's going to call them in order based on if an ad is available or not. And then the other is first price. So if the buyer ultimately does support sending us a price, you can do things in front of other SSPs that already give you the best price depending on how it's configured to really holistically optimize and manage your inventory that way as well.
I love it. I love the ability for a publisher to make buyers compete in a programmatic setting. I mean, that's one of the key elements of programmatic.
Yep, no, absolutely. And it's very much to give the publisher the control and granularity and ultimately make them more revenue and control their destiny. So, and
this is by specific slot too. So you could have situations where maybe one of them is waterfall. You have a clear mindset of who needs to make a little bit more or who's going to send you a little bit more money or more fill, and they need to be a higher priority for the pre-roll, the mid-roll, or whatnot. But for the post-roll, you might want to do it as first price. So having that flexibility in an alpha product already, I'm excited to see where this ends up.
Yep. No, we're excited. It's a huge part of our 2023 strategy. And we're going to make some awesome stuff happen here at SoundStack. So
very cool. So, Jon, we had an awesome time going through this deep dive. I mean, we did the podcaster side with the white label, the fact that anybody out there could have their own hosting platform with ad serving, with programmatic, with all these capabilities. We dug a little bit into broadcast to podcast, and we ended with your alpha product about monetization, which on top of your dynamic ad insertion capabilities is really focused on programmatic. And I think programmatic, the team you have at SoundStack, is probably some of the leaders in audio programmatic, some of the people who built a lot of the foundational stuff there. So when you start to nerd out on that, it gets my nerd senses tingling, because this is the next step. This is where we really need to focus. And while I think people are putting attention to it, it's very clear that this is a focus for SoundStack. I do want to end this off by saying that the deep dives are a goal to show you products that I find interesting with companies that are really leading the space. And I think SoundStack is doing a great example there. But your specific needs are different than mine. And Jon and team are absolutely available to walk you through the platform to answer your specific questions. So I really want you to go to soundstack.com and reach out to them. Sign up for your own demo and walk through it, because all of these pieces can be mix and match. You can use certain aspects and not others. You can white label it. You can dig into it. You can see what works for you. And honestly, you can challenge the team because it's very clear from the features that are already in here so early on in this product that they are here to listen to their clients and work with their clients to meet the needs that aren't being met elsewhere. So, Jon, anything else you want to say before we wrap up this fantastic deep dive?
I just want to say thanks for having me on your show. And this was an awesome hour for the deep dive. So appreciate it. We'll have other stuff to show you next year as well.
I'm very excited for that. Thanks, everyone.